Welcome everyone to our explainer. Today we're doing a deep dive into a concise guide to Hadith terminology. Think of this as stepping inside a massive three-dimensional digital architecture. We are going to completely demystify how ancient scholars authenticated information, separating fact from fiction with just incredible precision. It's a fascinating, robust data structure, so let's start building. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our complete structural blueprint. We're going to build this methodology layer by layer, covering 6 key areas: foundations of Hadith terminology, transmission routes and frequencies, the criteria for acceptance, analyzing rejected traditions, categories of attribution, and finally, the architecture of Hadith compilations. Section 1, Foundations of Hadith terminology, the bedrock of verification. We have to start right here by establishing the base foundational blocks of our three-dimensional structure. The very first block you need to know is the senad, or isnad. Conceptually, I want you to picture this as a deep, incredibly strong historical pillar. The sanad is the chain of narrators. It's the sequential list of men and women who pass the information down through time. It's essentially the human bridge that leads directly to the text itself. In this science, an isolated piece of information is completely meaningless without knowing the exact integrity of the pillar holding it up. And that leads us right to our second foundational block, which is the matan. This is the actual text, the wording, or the core message where that chain of narrators finally ends. So the crucial point is that the matan, the text itself, cannot stand independently without its supporting sanad. The entire science of hadith is essentially the study of how these two elements interact. We're basically evaluating the strength of the chain to determine if we can safely accept the text resting right on top of it. Moving up a layer, we hit Section 2, Transmission Routes and Frequencies, Weighing the Chains. This is where we measure the sheer volume of these historical transmission routes. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the massive contrast between absolute certainty and probability. On one side, we have mutawatir. This means a text was transmitted by such an overwhelming, huge number of independent narrators at every single stage that a conspiracy to forge it is, well, it's logically and historically impossible. It yields absolute, undeniable knowledge. On the other side, we have ahad. These traditions arrived through a limited, specific number of paths. And because they lack that overwhelming critical mass, ahad traditions require strict, rigorous scrutiny before they can be accepted. So within that ahad category, scholars literally physically counted the narrators at every historical layer. If there's even a single layer where only one person transmits it, it's called gharib, meaning solitary. If there are at least 2 narrators at every single stage, it's aziz, or strong. And if there are 3 or more narrators in every single layer, but it still doesn't quite reach the massive crowd required for mutawatir, it's classified as mashhur, meaning famous or widely circulated. It is fascinating how the physical count of people instantly changes the categorization. Section 3, the criteria for acceptance, the filters of authenticity. Think of this as the strict quality assurance filter within our architectural framework. To achieve the absolute gold standard, what's known as sahih lidatihi, or inherently authentic, a tradition has to pass 5 grueling tests. First, there must be a perfectly continuous chain with 0 missing links. Second, every single narrator must be completely just and trustworthy. Third, they need to possess perfect memory or incredibly precise recording skills. Fourth, the text and chain must be free from shadh, meaning it doesn't contradict a stronger, more established source. And finally, fifth, it has to be free from any illah. Those are subtle, hidden flaws that really only master scholars can detect. These 5 steps stack together to form an ironclad authentication. Based on those 5 tests, accepted traditions actually fall into 4 distinct grades. You have your absolute top tier, sahih lidatihi. But what if a narrator's memory is just, slightly less than perfect? Well, it drops a grade to hasan lidatihi, meaning inherently good. But here is the really cool part. The system is highly dynamic. If you have a slightly weaker Hassan chain, but you find multiple different routes supporting it, this sheer reinforcement elevates it back up to sahih lighairihi, which means authentic due to external support. Multiple routes can even elevate a mildly weak tradition up to an acceptable level. It just shows how interconnected this entire network really is. Which brings us to Section 4, Analyzing Rejected Traditions, Structural Flaws. So what happens to the structure when a chain breaks down or narrator's integrity fails?
The taxonomy of rejected or da'if traditions is massive, but it neatly splits into two root causes. In the first column, we have rejections based on human error or character. Maybe a narrator's memory deteriorates over time, or they're completely unknown, accused of lying, or they contradict stronger authorities. Then, in the second column, we have rejections based on missing historical links. This could be a missing narrator anywhere in the chain, two consecutively missing narrators, or a narrator obscuring who they actually heard it from. So it really boils down to human flaw versus a structural gap in the data.
Now, among all these rejected categories, we absolutely must single out the most severe, the Madhu. This is a deliberate, intentional fabrication, a lie falsely attributed to the prophet. Identifying a Madhu tradition was the absolute highest priority for these early scholars because it represents a malicious attempt to corrupt the foundational data. It is the ultimate failure, and it is completely discarded from the framework, no exceptions.
Section 5. Categories of Attribution. The roof of the structure. Let's move to and see how this builds as we look at who the text is ultimately attributed to.
A tradition is categorized based on its final source. If the text is attributed directly to the prophet, it's called marfu. If it stops at a companion, it's makuf. And if it stops at the generation after them, a follower, it's called maktu. Now notice the critical linguistic distinction here. Maktu refers to who the text belongs to. You absolutely must never confuse it with the similar-sounding word munkuti, which we talked about earlier. Remember, munkuti is a fatal flaw, a broken chain. Maktu simply tells us the quote belongs to a historical follower. It's a really vital distinction to keep in mind.
Finally, Section 6, Architecture of Hadith Compilations Housing the Data. This is where all of that verified, meticulously graded data is systematically categorized and stored.
And this brilliantly illustrates how, after decades of vetting, filtering, and grading, different scholarly compilations organize the exact same verified data using completely different indexing systems. So, a Jami attempts to collect traditions across all major topics: belief, law, history, the whole shebang. A Musnad, on the other hand, ignores topics entirely and instead sorts every tradition by the companion who narrated it. A Sunan is structured strictly around chapters of law and jurisprudence, and a Mujam acts almost like a directory, organizing traditions alphabetically by the names of the author's teachers. It is a highly sophisticated, multi-layered database.
But wait, beyond the primary databases, scholars built highly specialized formats. A mustadak collects traditions that previous masters missed, but which still meet their exact strict criteria. A mustakhraj takes an existing book and finds entirely new, independent chains for the exact same texts. There are books called ilal, dedicated solely to diagnosing those hidden flaws we talked about earlier. A juice is dedicated to a single, hyper-specific topic, and arba'un are curated collections of exactly 40 essential traditions. The sheer exhaustiveness of this historical science is truly staggering. So we've seen the foundations, the transmission math, the roofless filters, and the incredibly complex data architecture. Considering this monumental, multi-dimensional taxonomy of verification, I really want to leave you with this provocative thought. How does this ancient, rigorous system of preserving oral and written texts compare to our modern historical methodology? Think about the literal lengths they went to just to verify a single sentence. It's amazing. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive through the architecture of Hadith terminology.